I'm Sal D'Agostino. I'm president of the IDEF, and so I'm going to give an overview of the framework, which, looking at the people in the room, seems like what I'm about to do is to mansplain, right? I'm going to tell you about something that you already know about in a way that you may or may not necessarily think is new and unique, but it is important to understand what this framework is and what it brings to the table. And before I actually get into the details of it, I was doing a little booth duty in the process of being here. We do have a booth upstairs, and I encourage people to stop by and take a look. There's some really nice materials that Connolly Works has put together that you can take along with you and hand out and help to promote what's going on. But so we had some visitors come by, and there was a gentleman from FedEx that came by. And I stopped and I started talking about this, and I said, well, what's your interest here? And he says, well, I've just been chartered by my company to put together a business framework for how we go about doing identity. And I said, well, hey, take a look at this. See what we're doing here. How does this IDEF that we've got line up with what you're doing? He took a look at that and said, thank you very much. You've just done my job for me. So, I mean, it in fact is really exciting for this organization to go from talking to ourselves and working on something that we think is critically important and all very much believe in, into a situation where we now get to talk to the outside world and begin to validate whether or not what we're doing is actually what we set out to do. So, I'm going to go through the IDEF. If anybody has any questions, stop me along the way, please. This is going to be relatively brief. Take about 20 minutes to do this, and then I'll be handing it off to Mary to get into the real fun stuff, which is the registry. So, why are we here? Yes, President Obama put out the national strategy. Yes, there's a program office at NIST. And this was the genesis of this. But at this point in time, very honestly, I mean, it's not only the national strategy, but this is the IDESG strategy. There's a very firm belief that there is a better way to do online identity, and that the way that takes place is not for it to be in the siloed enterprise security perspective of identity, and it's not for it to be in the traditional way that people look at do identity and access management, but it's really taking a citizen and individual-centric view of what's going on there, and to have a very well-rounded view of what identity needs to do day in and day out as we engage in our digital lives. Everybody's got their set of identity numbers, right? And this is really easy to do because what it shows is just how tricky it is out there today to actually try to get identity right. This is 85 million records breached in the U.S. in 2014. That number's gone up, right? 17.6 million residents 16 or older identity theft. And it doesn't even need to be you directly. I mean, my wife works on a federal advisory committee to Commerce and Interior on protecting on marine protected areas. So she had to get her stuff cleared by OMB. So of course, when that hack took place, my personal identification, my PII, my personally identifiable information, is pretty commingled with that of my wife, right? So so I was hit, even though it wasn't my identity per se. Hopefully everybody's trying to do something to protect against identity theft. But the real one very important part of this rationale is that there's a very strong economic incentive to do this properly, right? So from a national perspective, from a business perspective, this can impact growth, right? Or it can absolutely stifle the evolution of online identity, right? So 62, all these numbers are important. And remember the little pointer thingy here. Never mind. 62% did not use mobile banking because they thought there was a risk involved. So the second that this stuff gets to the point where you're afraid to do something, the potential of doing things online basically will completely fall off the table. And so what the IDESG is doing and what the framework does really can have a significant impact on economic growth and prosperity. And when I gave this presentation a couple days ago, I also pointed out it can be a matter of life and death. The third leading cause of death in a hospital is what? Mistaken identity, right? So not only is it economic prosperity, not only is it personal privacy and data, I mean, this can actually be a matter of life and death. And I think a lot of us who are involved with this have internalized and actually really believe that. I mean, I know it has a lot to do why I'm so dedicated to this organization, and I think I think it has a lot to do with why everybody else is as well. As I keep track of time. So what is the IDEF? I mean, we refer to it as the rules of the road. The gentleman from FedEx referred to it as a business framework. It's a way for you to a way for you to develop a set of requirements. It could be a design requirement spec for your identity product for all intents and purposes, and probably be inclusive of things that your product team really didn't know that you needed to consider in order to be able to do identity right. And it is something that is the result of probably, I don't know what the number is. We should actually calculate it. But I would say 10,000 man-hours of some of the leading subject matter experts out there in the identity world having constructed this. Maybe that's not the most efficient number we could have come up with. Could we have done it with 7,000 hours? Sure. But the fact is that a lot of hard work went into this, and it's a real thing that's now bringing forth other things like the registry. What does it do? It basically sets up how you as an individual can assess online identity service providers. As a service provider, it can basically set up how you should be going about doing business in the online world. And it really does define how, ideally, the whole digital identity ecosystem should evolve. And why is it necessary? I think we just went through that, right? And so, who can use it, right? So the registry, which Mary's going to be talking about, is very focused on service providers, right? But besides that, where is their value to this framework, right? So certainly it provides value for other trust frameworks, right? So as an example, we're in the process now of taking the IDEF and our baseline requirements and mapping them to the Kantara Identity Assurance Framework, right? Just to sort of see how we sit with other trust frameworks that are out there. It allows, one of the things that, if you're in the identity business and you're involved with standards or you trade organizations, right? It's, and I use this analogy in our board meeting yesterday, that it seems like there's, for every standard, there's another standard which begets a standard, which begets an organization, which begets a standard, which begets an organization. And what I said was, like, the IDESG is really not trying to be another head on the identity totem pole. We really think that what we can do is to help consolidate and make more efficient the relationships that are out there among the other organizations that exist in the ecosystem, and we can bring something new to the table. So from a trust framework perspective, as an example, not everybody has a very solid privacy or usability aspect to their frameworks, right? They tend to focus more around security and interoperability. For those that do have a privacy framework, maybe there's a way that we can, the combination of requirements help build a better framework for what's out there. It also helps people who are members of these other trust frameworks to easily join or get registered in the IDEF itself, on the IDEF registry, the registry formerly known as CIS. For relying parties, same thing. Relying parties, for all intents and purposes, are identity providers, right? And how they conduct business online, how they engage with their customers. I mean, you go out into the Cloud Identity Summit out here today, and you'll hear plenty of talks about how identity as a business, and identity as a thing in the enterprise was something that used to be very internally focused, right? So it used to be about protecting your assets and controlling what your employees do today. Today, the biggest spend on identity is outward facing. Right? It's customer centric. It's how do we leverage identity for our supply chain? How do we leverage identity to broaden our presence out there? The chief marketing officer spends as much on identity as the CIO does in many cases going forward. So there's a big benefit to relying parties to having this sound business framework about how to do this, and clearly for individuals as well. I mean, I think the registry that we put together, the goal is that it's something like a combination of a Yellow Pages and an Angie's List for service providers. Yeah, how could my 97-year-old Italian mother look at something and actually know whether or not that's the best multi-factor authentication technique for her, right? It's not an easy thing to convey, right? And so what we're trying to do with this information that we're putting out there is actually make it accessible to individuals and not necessarily just the 900 identirati that have shown up at the Cloud Identity Summit. So how did we get there, and what's it involved? First, we came up with a scoping statement, right? So what are we going to do? And we said what we were going to do. And a lot of that is to make the national strategy and the IDESG strategy real. We then came up with a set of baseline requirements that cover these various areas, right? So interoperability, privacy, security, usability, the 45 basic rules of the road, and then the underlying guidance that helps support those 45 high-level assertions. And then in order to be able to get people to then figure out how they played in the ecosystem, we put together a functional model that allows people to say, oh yeah, I'm one of those, and therefore let me see which of these requirements apply to that. And so I'm just going to take a second to go through each of those. The initial product, so when we put together the scoping statement, it said basically we're going to create a framework. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that, right? But once you've said that, what is it that you need to put together in order for that to be actionable and real? And that was something that we delivered at the end of 2015, right? That was plenary approved. That was a huge step forward for the IDSG. We actually shipped product. When I became president a year ago, I mean, that was one of my primary goals here. And it's not like I did this alone, but for me, the key thing that the IDSG needed to do was to change from being an inwardly focused, trying to figure out who we are and what we are and how we go about doing things, to actually shipping it, right? So any of us who are out there in the business world, right, it's hard to have an ongoing enterprise if you don't get product out the door. And a lot of times, it's not going to be perfect, but you need to ship it in order to get it out there, to begin to get feedback, to make it better. So we did that at the end of last year, and then that framework basically, which includes those baseline requirements, allowed us to then engage with people out there in the ecosystem to see how good a job we did when we came up with what we said we were going to do. And then it does establish this baseline, which, as I said, can be a lot of things to a lot of people. And those baseline requirements. Has anybody not seen the baseline requirements? Right. So I knew I was mansplaining. But here they are, right? Does anybody have an opinion? Anybody used them yet in their day-to-day lives to do anything? David, I'm glad to hear you did. Ken, excellent, right? So I'm not going to ask people to say what it was, but I encourage you to begin to think of this as a useful tool, right? I mean, I have. I mean, I've used it. I've actually used it with my clients who are national ID programs outside of the United States in order to look at how they might be issuing citizen-based identity. It is a tool that, in some ways, we should certainly be charging for. I mean, it is, it's open source from an IDESG perspective, but as an identity professional, this is something you can take with you. I mean, we actually have up in the booth a little card with a little checklist on the back. Even taking that little card and using that checklist when you look at some identity service is kind of a really useful thing to do, quite honestly, at the end of the day. And then, then there's the FAQs about, for all the questions for the people who aren't in this room about what this is. And again, the thing that I think is really helpful about this, it is this well-rounded view of what it means to be doing identity properly online. And I think we're making the statement that this is unique, that there isn't anything else out there, and I think this is the reason why, right? The fact that it is more well-rounded, it is a business perspective. It is not just about which crypto algorithm is better, or should I be signing, or blockchain or not, right? That we're not down at we're not down in the weeds there. We're up at a level which I really think this is accessible and usable for a very wide audience. All right, so everybody's seen them. Here they are, right? Anybody have a negative opinion? That's okay, Kim. So I was looking for Jen to tell me something at this point, because she always has some comment around what I'm doing. But so I actually think it's a great set of stuff, right? Certainly it's going to evolve. Certainly one of the things about this is that we actually don't expect anybody who signs up for the registry to be able to tick all these boxes. We may find out that some of these things that are up here, maybe not something that we'll maintain going forward. But as a set of baseline requirements, which is what we were trying to do, I think it really does achieve those goals. The functional model, these are the referred to as the verbs of it. I mean, the important thing is that you understand the roles that you have in the ecosystem. So, I mean, this allows you to say, okay, here I am, ID machines. We provide digital identity for IoT as an example. Where do we sit in this as a company in the ecosystem, and how can we then identify among these core operations the functions that we actually deliver? So again, Mary will be talking about for those companies that register, basically you pick one of these things, and then what happens is that the website will then help you determine which of the baseline requirements apply. And Mary will give you a more thorough and with examples from the actual website of how we've gone about and accomplished that. Move this identity revolution forward. We met our deadlines. That is something as an organization I'm committed to us doing. Of doing things on time, online, in an effective manner. We did have we had a tremendous launch yesterday. We actually had a really good board meeting yesterday as well, where I think the elected leadership of this organization very much is in consensus about how we're going to drive this organization forward. And I'm just, in fact, really excited to actually try to put an identity revolution in place. These are the things we're going to do. This is part of the value that, Mark, you're going to be talking about a little bit later. This is why we're out here. This is why we've gotten the funding that we have from NIST, and why we believe that the IDESG as an organization matters. And again, building a better digital identity ecosystem with the framework. So let's move it forward. Join the IDESG, self-attest, tell a friend, join us. The work in the committees is continuing to evolve to tackle some of the most interesting identity problems that are out there, right? The things that we're doing in the privacy committee, the things that we're doing in the usability committees, the things that we're doing across the IDESG. are an opportunity for you to engage with people who really are the subject matter experts. I mean, again, I'm telling you because you're the people that are going to come who are the subject matter experts. That's the value to the outside world. So tell a friend and promote the good work that we're all doing, please. And join today. So at that point, I've got about a minute left. Does anybody really have any questions about the framework? I didn't think so. So thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.